And we're going to take you live now to Port Botany in Sydney. Major Projects Minister Paul Fletcher speaking on BW and Labor's infrastructure plan.
To encourage private sector investment in infrastructure and in a range of projects that are part of the current Turnbull government $50 billion infrastructure plan. There is scope for private sector investment. For example, the investment in North Connects and in West Connects in Sydney both involve private sector investment either at the present stage or at a later stage. But the key point really is this, that any private sector investment in infrastructure requires a financial return. So there needs to be a way that the investors get a return on their investment. So Labor's talking about, for example, superannuation funds investing as part of this proposal. And there's certainly a role for superannuation funds, but the projects need to be ones which generate a financial return. Now, public transport projects, rail projects for example, typically the fare revenue does not cover the operating costs, let alone offer a repayment of the capital costs. So it's all very well to talk about a greater role for superannuation and for the private sector. And of course that is absolutely worth exploring, and that is something that the Turnbull government continues to do, and we have private sector involvement in a number of projects. But it's not a silver bullet, because unless a project generates a financial return, the private sector, including superannuation funds, is not going to be in a position to invest in it. So look, we welcome the fact that Labor is talking about infrastructure. Infrastructure is very important to Australia's productivity and efficiency. That's why we are investing $50 billion. We've got a $50 billion infrastructure plan across a whole range of projects around Australia. We're in constructive discussions with state governments about the way forward for that program. But Labor's plan to invest, or Labor's plan to borrow another $10 billion for infrastructure announced today really needs to be put in context against the $50 billion plan that the Turnbull government has, and they really need to answer the question, if this is about further investment, where are the projects which generate a financial return? These are the questions that Labor needs to give more detail on in relation to their $10 billion borrowing on investment.
Just to be clear on the numbers though, you're saying a $50 billion plan versus their 10, aren't you spending more?
I want to make a couple of points there. First, we've got a $50 billion plan. Now Labor is talking about borrowing $10 billion. I'm making the point that in context of the existing scale of investment, you need to understand what they're proposing against that scale of investment. I'd make the point also that included in our plan is $4.2 billion for asset recycling. So this is where the Commonwealth makes money available to state governments to support them realising capital presently invested in assets and reallocating that in other assets. So a good example is here in New South Wales, where the Baird government has a plan to realise many billions of dollars from a long-term lease of the poles and wires, and they've laid out a plan as to where that money will go, including into the Sydney Metro, a major rail project, for example. Now, the Commonwealth Asset Recycling Fund allows a 15% bonus or additional contribution on the proceeds that a state government receives through a process of realising its capital in existing assets. Now that's available around Australia, and for example, if the Victorian government proceeds with the privatisation of the Port of Melbourne, then it would be eligible to receive funding under the Asset Recycling Fund, and that, for example, could be available for the Melbourne Metro Rail project.
Has that been held up though, the recycling funding that has been approved by the Senate?
Well, it continues to be our policy commitment, and the money is available there from the federal government. Can I make this point about the Melbourne Metro Rail project, which was one of the ones that was included in this list of projects that Labor has issued today? We need to see a business case for that. Now, my understanding is that the business case for that will not be available, I'm told, until early next year. So we certainly encourage the provision of a business case on that and on other projects where state governments wish to put forward a project. But there is a process there. Let's see a business case, let's see a cost-benefit analysis, because what we need to do is have the most rational prioritisation of projects. Of course, budgets are finite at federal and state level, so we need to make sure that money is going to the projects that deliver the highest national benefits in terms of efficiency.
But what do you need to get that asset recycling money through the Senate?
Well, look, we're continuing to engage on that, but the key point is that is our policy commitment, and that money is available to state governments. Okay.
Sorry,
Yep.
Inland Rail.
Yes.
There was a mention of that.
Yeah.
That needing to be built for further initiatives to take strain out of the Sydney network. Where is that process at, and what's your position?
There's a recommendation or a proposal that's been put to the government, and obviously that's now a matter for the government to consider, and there's not really much more I can say about that.
Do you think it'll be before the election?
Well, all I can say is that'll be a matter for the government to consider. Can I just make some comments too about the other issue that's around in the portfolio area today, which is the question of the emission defeat devices that have been installed in Audi and Volkswagen vehicles. This is a global issue affecting the Volkswagen Group. They have installed, it seems, these devices into some of their diesel-powered vehicles. The effect of them is that when a vehicle is going through emissions testing, it operates differently to its normal mode of operation, and as a consequence, it appears to emit less during that period than it emits in its normal operation. This is a very troubling issue. It's a global issue. The Australian companies Volkswagen Australia and Audi Australia announced yesterday over 90,000 vehicles in Australia have been sold with these devices. The companies have been in discussion with the government. We have asked, and the companies have agreed, to provide a mechanism so that customers can go to their websites, put in the VIN, the vehicle identification number of their vehicle, to find out if the diesel-powered vehicle they own, manufactured by VW, Audi or Skoda, has one of these devices. The vehicles are safe to drive, but it is important that there be a process to allow these devices to be fixed, and the companies will have more to say about that in due course. The government is also considering the question, and this is through the ACCC, of potential responses in relation to the conduct of these companies. This is a breach of the Australian design rules, and that in turn is a breach of the Australian consumer law, and so that is a matter that the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission is investigating in consultation with my department, the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development.
And what sort of penalties would there be if they have been found to breach?
Look, there are significant penalties that are potentially available under that legislation, and that's obviously a matter we'll be considering. Yep.
Sorry, Minister, can I jump in on another one of your portfolios? So you're the Minister for Local Government.
Yes.
Do you support state governments forcing amalgamations, forcing mergers?
Look, those are really...
Would you mind facing the camera?
Sorry. So I'm asked the question, would I support state governments in relation to council amalgamations? That is a matter for state governments. Constitutionally, state governments have responsibility for local government, and that is just the way our constitutional allocation of responsibilities works. I have some federal government responsibilities in relation to local government, but I will leave it to state governments to develop and implement policies in that area. Thanks very much.
Generally, do you support the New South Wales government's IPART process?
Look,
getting independent panels?
the New South Wales government is managing the issue of how it deals with the structure of local governments, and that is a matter for the New South Wales government. I'm obviously being kept informed, but I'm not going to comment on that because that is being handled very capably by the New South Wales government. Thanks very much. Thank you.
You've been watching a live news conference with the Major Projects Minister, Paul Fletcher, reflecting there on the VW scandal, saying this is a